Welcome to the Diabetes Tour Guide. I am your host, Andy. I have worked as a physician assistant in the integrative health space for over 4 years, and I have lived with type 1 diabetes for over 19 long years. So, I know that diabetes, just like medicine, is not one size fits all. We are going to discover and uncover the nuances of diabetes and hopefully master them one step or one stop at a time. So today, we are going to continue our discussion of insulin. Remember, this is the main molecule behind diabetes. We've discussed that this hormone acts like a key to unlock glucose getting out of the blood or out of the artery and into the cell. And remember the cells that we're working on: liver, we're working on fat cells, and we're working on skeletal muscle cells. But what happens when there is not enough insulin? So let's refer to the diagram of the day. If you'll look behind me, this is a pretty simple diagram, but pretty important diagram. On one side, you'll see that there's normal blood glucose and this is in the artery, in the blood. It's represented by those white kind of angular shaped molecules. Then on the other side, you'll see when there's high blood glucose, when there's a lot of those angular shapes accumulating and getting in massive quantities still in the blood. This is a simple concept, but I want you to note the difference between the two. One with a normal or optimal level of glucose, where the blood can flow easily through the arteries. And one with an abnormally high level of glucose running through that same arterial system. It's like traffic getting backed up. And remember, glucose is glycosylated. It's angular. It's sharp. You can notice that in the molecules behind me. They're angular. So when they're sharp, they cut. And when they cut through a very small, narrow pathway, that's where we get problems, which we'll talk about in future episodes. So, glucose on top of glucose with no signaling pattern to leave the blood, to leave the artery, to get into the cell is what happens when there is insulin deficiency. So this is when there's not enough insulin. So there's no key to work with the lock that signals glucose to move. That's a simple concept, but very important. With this accumulation, we get a condition called hyperglycemia, which is in the diagram behind me. That will be covered in a different stop along our tour, which will have a lot to talk about then. But why does this happen, and when does this happen? When there's not enough insulin. Let's refer to the second diagram of the day. So you'll notice too that this is a pretty simple diagram as well, but we'll notice that there is a patient right here in the middle between two versions of insulin producing cells that are there and that are not there. So we'll notice that this patient is young. So this is mainly happening with something called type 1 diabetes. It used to be called juvenile diabetes because that was primarily when they found insulin deficient conditions. So type 1 diabetes, all I want you to think of is insulin deficiency, not enough insulin. And remember, we go back to basics. Insulin, lock and key. If there's no key, the lock does not get unlocked and the door does not open, so glucose accumulates. In this, you'll see that we're getting a little bit of a hyper-focused view on these cells that make insulin. So we're in the pancreas now, where insulin is made, and now we're in the beta cells. So on one side, you'll see that insulin is secreted into the bloodstream from those very viable light blue cells that are surrounding the bloodstream. Those are the beta cells that make insulin. On the other side, you'll notice that those cells are destroyed. So they're darkened, they're decrepit, they're necrosed, they don't work anymore. So no insulin is going into the bloodstream. So what happens? Type 1 diabetes. This is the condition that results from too little insulin circulating from the pancreas, an organ which we'll discuss in detail on another tour. For right now, I want you to note several key words and phrases that deal with too little insulin. Type 1 diabetes is a condition where beta cells, the cells within the pancreas, remember, look at the diagram behind us, that make insulin, are destroyed by a process called autoimmunity. Autoimmunity means the body's natural defenses mistakenly attack your own cells rather than foreign cells. We have this whole immune system that works to protect us from the outside world. For some reason, and there's a lot of different reasons we'll discuss on different tours or different stops along our tour, those cells that make insulin are attacked, destroyed, and insulin is no longer made. So this results in, what are we talking about today? Insulin deficiency. So insulin, our main hormone, is important to understand because too much or too little can result in different disease states that technically have the same name. There's type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, type 1.5, pre-diabetes, gestational diabetes, type 3 diabetes, and sometimes type 4. There's a lot of different types, but it all deals with that main hormone and whether it is working the way it should or the way it shouldn't. So with too little insulin or no insulin at all in the body, this condition can also be called Hypo Insulinemia. So these are important phrases to key because they spell themselves out. Hypo means little or no or low. Insulin is the hormone we're talking about. Anemia means in the blood. You'll see in that diagram that we looked at that there was no insulin being secreted or sent into the bloodstream to work. So its target molecule, glucose, does not know it needs to leave the blood, and it accumulates. And this can cause a whole cascade of symptoms, which will be a very, very interesting and very illuminating stop along our tour. But we will talk about that at a later time as we continue our tour along diabetes. So join me next week as we find out what happens when insulin becomes resistant, when there's too much insulin working. But for now, I leave you with insulin deficiency. Below, I want you to comment, engage with me. Let me know if you have any questions. Remember, too, we're taking this one stop at a time. We want to really get into the nuances so that we master key concepts before we move on to bigger concepts. All this is a cascade, just like hormones in our body. Our tour has a cascade where we build on each other, and we'll build along each stop. But comment below, engage, send me a hey, tell me what you're feeling, and we'll include those in future episodes. But for now, I will leave you along this stop. Thank you.